So, this channel, I don't do politics. I just don't. But we do need to address, well, there's a lot of Trump merch that is flooding the Etsy platform. And my question is this within the terms of service? We talked about this a few months back because they did make some changes about political items that could be sold and how they could be sold. So today I want Chris's opinion because Chris is a little bit more, news worthy. Let me say that because you understand what's being done, what's being said, but you also understand the terms of service and you can usually find a way to make it make sense for people like me. So let's talk about this, Chris. Like we knew this was going to happen, right? We knew that there was going to be this merch coming out, and it's literally taking the photo from that day and putting it on a t-shirt and selling it. So is there anything that someone should be worried about for doing this? And again, we're not saying like you should, you shouldn't. We're not saying any of that stuff. We just want to know. And this goes for anything, like anything that happens, like a major event. Is it okay to take that picture that was shot, that was posted on Google, wherever? Is it okay to take that picture and start selling?
Yeah. And I think for those of you guys who aren't aware, I'm not sure how you aren't. The US is in the middle of a presidential election cycle, and somebody tried to remove one of the candidates permanently. And there is what most people, regardless of political affiliation, consider to be a really cool picture of that candidate, Donald Trump, standing up after the fact and, saying fight, 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 I believe were the words that came out. And we've gotten flooded, Scott, with questions, not just about that particular image, but about political products in general. And if you guys weren't aware, a few months ago, Etsy rolled out a new policy. I believe it goes into effect the end of July. It's like the 28th or the 29th of July. That was changes to their prohibited items policy. And it seemed like they took out a lot of the leeway for political products to begin with. And it basically boiled down to, as long as it's not about a specific issue that could offend somebody, or it's something you otherwise have the rights to do, you can probably sell it on the platform. The problem, Scott, I think that a lot of people are running into, and I want your opinion on this as well, is they want to take that particular image and use it in merch, or they want to take a campaign slogan and use it in merch, right? For example, if we think about somebody like Donald Trump, most people will know, whether they're American or not, that his campaign slogan since 2016 has been "Make America Great Again," or MAGA, right? Did you create that slogan? Do you own the rights to it? If not, then you shouldn't be selling those things. You're running into a potential trademark infringement issue, right? You do have some leeway when it comes to political things, but specific phrases can still be trademarked. That one very specifically is. How aggressively they're going after it, who knows? But you shouldn't be selling things you don't own the rights to. And Scott, that's really what pulls me back to the photo to begin with. The very first question I would have for somebody who's asking me this, and I think you would have the same thing, is do you own the rights to it? If you didn't take the image, then you shouldn't be using it. And there are some things that we can do with artistic license to get around that. But do you, just off the top of your head, is there any reason you can think of that people would be using that without being the person who took the photo or the organization he belongs to that probably also has the rights to that image? Like, is there any reason you would ever consider selling that given those two things?
No, I mean, but again, I think it's also, I don't know. It's tough here because I think it comes down to, and maybe I'm just overly cautious, but it's like character is what I think the first thing that comes to mind. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm basically going to say, like, if you're just slapping up a shirt there, I said slapping up again, because that's basically what you're doing. You're taking an image, doesn't really belong to you. You're slapping it on a t-shirt, and you're basically trying to capitalize on a horrific event that just happened. Like, so I got to be careful here because I don't want it to seem as though I'm this rigid, but I am looking at character. I'm looking at like, and I look at Etsy. Like someone had said in the comments, that they honestly feel like political products don't belong on Etsy. And I think that could be a debate all on its own. And I do agree. It's like, I agree to a certain extent. I think it's okay to create stuff for a certain mission, a certain party, let's say, right? Like, and it's like you're supporting, right? I think like cancer, right? It's like, yes, like fight for cancer. Like it's like positive. But when we get into this, and someone had said it the other day too, and I'm not into politics like at all. I try not to even like pay too much attention because it's kind of crazy, but it's hard not to. But it does seem like right now it's been the worst it's ever been with like this divide. And it's like now it's like people are taking advantage of it. So I look at it as a character thing that it doesn't matter who it is. To me, it's just a matter of like, you're trying to capitalize on something and slap it up on a platform like Etsy. And I'm just surprised myself that Etsy even does allow that, even though in their terms of service, it says you can support a, whatever. So I don't know, Chris, did I help you on answering any of that?
Yeah. So I guess the question I would have for you, and right, you have a little bit of more of a personal stake in this because you ran a photography studio and you understand image rights and how important they are to the photographer, right? So obviously, if you don't have the rights to it, you shouldn't be using it. But if we think about something like, and just looking at the same candidate, right, the mugshot from Georgia, which is a public domain image, do you feel the same way about using that as you do? Let's just assume they're both public domain, right? They're two very different events, same person. Would you feel differently if it was that, or would you feel the same way? I'm just curious.
I'd probably feel a little bit like that much better, like that I didn't steal someone's like picture, like blatantly. Like if it's in public domain, like it's like, okay, it's fair use, I can use it. And then it comes down to 100% character. Because then I'm like, well, you're doing it, even though, it's not public domain. So yeah, it's a hard one for me. And someone had just said in the comments, using that image is infringement. There's no other way to look at it. And yeah, you're right. And as an ex-photographer, it's very hard to see that happen when you see someone take your image and then make copies and you didn't get paid for it because you took the picture. Now, some could argue and say, well, if it's posted on Facebook, it's public domain. I mean, basically they've said, Zuckerberg put out a whole thing. Like if there's an image, if you have an image that's publicly on your page, it's fair game. Am I wrong, Chris, in that? I thought that was something that came out like a couple years ago.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to overwrite the monetization of that image, right? So you publishing it to Facebook would give Facebook the rights to monetize that through ads, right? And earn that. But it doesn't give carte blanche to anybody else to use it, right? And I think the case here, and Scott, you might remember this. It was a while ago at this point. You remember the Hope and Change Barack Obama poster? That was that like blue and purple and red, right? Like a colorized image. There was a huge IP infringement lawsuit about the guy that originally took that and how much artistic license is involved before you can override that copyright, right? Because that was something, again, before this happened, that was something that everybody was putting everywhere, and it resulted in a bunch of lawsuits. So I think regardless of how you feel about the event itself, we need to think about this from a copyright trademark perspective. You probably don't have the rights to that image. Yes, you could make a fair use argument if you're changing it in certain ways, but that's not a positive defense, right? That's something a court would have to uphold. And if you're willing to do that, then we're not going to talk you out of putting that image up anyway. But the other thing I think this potentially exposes people to, and I get the argument on the other side, right? Because if I had listed that as a product and Etsy hit me with it, I would say, well, I'm not infringement of that because that's not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But under their prohibited items policy, they have a very specific phrase here. I'm going to see if I can pull it in really fast. That says.
And Chris, while you're pulling that up though, I'm just curious in the comments, who thinks it's okay? I'm just curious on your opinion. Is it okay to basically do that and put it up on Etsy and sell it? Or would you say you're not for it? I'm just curious. No judgment, by the way.
Okay, so I was close. It goes into effect on the 29th, Scott. And the old policy was in effect through the 28th. So I
Okay.
got both of those dates in there. I think we're fine. But the new version of this policy says we have a zero tolerance policy for prohibited items, specifically those that promote, support, or glorify hatred, those that promote, support, or glorify violence, or are otherwise unlawful, right? And so the argument that I could see happening here is a bunch of those listings getting flagged and saying, hey, this promotes violence or glorifies violence, because that image is a violent image. And the usage of that doesn't necessarily violate this policy. But again, that's a discussion you'd have to have with an Etsy AI robot. So to me, like
Right.
any upside of this is not worth it, because there's two major problems. One, you potentially are infringing on the spirit of this, even though the reason you're using it is not to glorify the violent act that took place. It's to glorify the recovery from the violent act. But seeing how YouTube has handled that policy, seeing how Facebook handles that language, I wouldn't want to get anywhere near this. And so thinking about this then, Scott,
I just pulled this up, bro.
Okay. I was like, I don't have that tab.
I just wanted to pull this up real quick. Like, so like when you think of Etsy, do you think of this? Right? Like that, I guess that's my thing here, right? It's like you missed, right? Like, so again, some of this you could argue and say, well, it's just, okay, here's a flag with, Trump 2024. Okay, fine. Fine. Right. But like you said, are we, because this was a violent act, is it, like this one right here, like, would you really think that like, that's not like, I don't know, like not promoting violence, but kind of like, I don't know. I'm like,
I think I have less of an issue with the double bird shirt you missed
yeah,
than I do with anything that involves the photo. One, because potentially you own the rights to that image, or you could create something, you could foresee a world in which you could create a shirt that says that,
yep.
right? And it's a big FU to everybody who doesn't like him and whatever, right? Like if that's your thing, go for it. But if we start with the image itself, you don't own the rights to that. You
Right.
also don't own the rights to the names of the campaign. You don't own the rights to some very specific things like slogans. And
Right.
so if you're including those on products, if you are a fan of creating political products, which go for it if that's your thing, right? You got to pay attention to these things. These things are policed. These things have rights issues involved. And just because it's a public campaign doesn't mean that you can just take it and do whatever you want to do with it. So think about this like you would with anything else, Scott. If you wanted to create Philadelphia Eagles merch, because I know you're such a big Philadelphia Eagles fan.
No, that would be burning. That would be burning their flag.
Not creating burn. So if you weren't lighting things on fire and you had to create Philadelphia Eagles merch or Giants merch, I'll give you this one, right?
Okay.
You could potentially get away with some like red and blue, right?
Yeah.
You could get away with some jokes, some inside things, right? Some slogans that you made up, whether for the Giants or against the Giants, right? Like I could create a green t-shirt.
Yep.
That says my two favorite teams are the Eagles and anyone who's playing the New York Giants, right? Something like that. We could probably get away with. And if we think about it through that lens, it becomes a little bit more obvious. A politician, campaign slogans, campaign names, campaign designs are no different than a sports team or anyone else. And people seem to be very confused by that. And if you look at the trademark database, it's very clear that they own the marks to those things. And it's because there's the public perception of like, oh, it's a public campaign, it's a politician, so it's fair game. You still have to take the creative license. You can't just take a picture that somebody else took. And Scott, do you still have that screen pulled up? I want to see the wall art, because there was one piece of wall art that was right there that was literally the picture.
Yeah.
Right. It was just the picture. There was no filter put over it. Right. If you scroll down a little bit here.
Well, I mean, even this one right here. That's the picture.
Right. Like the most artistic thing that we've seen so far is the double birds one.
Well, they're using video here too.
Yeah. So they're doing some things right. Right
this
there.
One?
Right there. $49.95. Right to the right of that.
Oh, right here.
That is literally just the picture.
Yeah.
Right. There's no reason that you would think you have the rights to that image. And so don't list this stuff.
Right.
Can you list political stuff on Etsy? Whether people agree with it or not? Yes. Are there rules you have to pay attention to? Yes. Rule number 1, do you own the rights to the thing that you are listing on Etsy? If
Right.
yes, then proceed. If no, then no. Just because it's a political thing, it doesn't mean that you got the rights to that. You do still have to pay attention to the prohibited items policy. And Scott, you and I talked about this. We did a video on it. But anything that could be perceived as encouraging violence, encouraging basically the issues-based stuff. So putting up a t-shirt about immigration or build the wall or any of those kinds of things. If you're willing to risk your account, go for it. If not, then figure out another way to make your mark on Etsy.
Yeah. So again, a little uncomfortable, right? This conversation, this topic, but I think it's something to put out there that if you're thinking about going down this road, not just with Trump merch or Biden merch or whoever, right? It doesn't really matter at this time. I'm just trying to make people aware of like, this is probably not okay. Now, some of the merch that they're selling in there, not a problem, right? They're just supporting their party. Nothing wrong with that, right? And that's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is like blatantly taking a picture that was shot by someone else and then putting it on a massive wall art and selling that. I think that could be a problem. If there's anything that is violence related, should be like if it's, something with the word fight in it, maybe, I don't know, like that could maybe flag something because you're saying to fight. So again, is Etsy doing anything right now? It doesn't appear to be, even looking at this. But maybe I'm wrong. But really this message here was just to allow you to understand in the terms of service, it clearly states that you can't just, number one, you can't copy other people's images and put it up. Number two is whenever you're talking about political stuff, you have to be careful. And so just understand that you are running a risk if you're getting a little edgy within the political realm. All right. So just be aware of what's happening out there, because you don't want to have your account get suspended because you want to make a quick buck.